Hello, everyone. Welcome to Realization Hub. This is Michelle, and I'm an intuitive healer, spiritual counselor, energy healer, and channeler. And today's message is all about growth periods, which is psychic lingo for having an expansion and allowing yourself to catch up to that expansion on an energetic and physical level. And so, this is a little bit different than learning a skill. We go through a growth process when we learn a skill. We first start a skill and we're really vulnerable and we suck at it. And sometimes it's confusing and frustrating. And we go through that vulnerable process of having to show up and practice and be a little disciplined and learn something new and get better at it until eventually you master that skill. And that is a type of growth process. That's something that you apply your mind to. It's something that you embody. It's something that you show up for physically. And that's a type of growth. And the same thing can happen with an internal pattern that we have. We could have a pattern related to our communication, or a pattern related to our relationships, or a pattern related to our abundance. And we could first become aware of that pattern because we're currently stuck in it. And it's really confusing. It's really frustrating. It's probably painful in some way. And you are wondering how to break that pattern. And so you start to bring more awareness to it. You start to bring awareness to that pattern, and your awareness begins to expand. Like, oh, where did this pattern begin? Maybe it began in childhood. Maybe it began deeper, like in my bones, like on an ancestral level. Or maybe it happened kind of like on a soul level, like it's a past life karmic wound of some kind. And you bring awareness to it. And that awareness keeps expanding. And within that pattern, you start to become aware of the pattern happening while you're in it. Like, oh, this pattern is happening again, and I'm aware of it this time as it's happening. I'm aware of how I'm creating the pattern. I'm aware of how I'm enabling the pattern. I'm aware of all the different ways this pattern plays out with me and other people and my energy. And eventually you start to bring more and more awareness to it, where now, before that pattern even happens, you can smell it. You're aware of it. It's like, I smell that pattern. I see that pattern starting to brew again. And eventually you can actually stop the pattern before the pattern plays itself out. And you break the pattern. And now you consciously show up differently. And you change the pattern. And now you are living more freely. You're outside the pattern and you are experiencing more freedom. You're experiencing more of you, and you have gone beyond that pattern. And that's how it feels to embody a healing, to rebalance something within you, which does require growth, which does require healing. And oftentimes that can happen over time, and there can actually be many growth periods that occur within that process. And I just want to talk about kind of the dynamics of a growth period first. The first thing that occurs in a growth period is that your consciousness has an expansion. And it's kind of like if you have a bubble and that bubble suddenly shifts to a bigger bubble. It goes from being a small bubble the size of a tennis ball to maybe a bubble that's the size of a beach ball. That is like having a shift in consciousness. All of a sudden, your consciousness expands in all directions. Okay, just like a bubble. It expands in all directions. And then from there, you on a human level are still in your same reality, still in your same physical experience, but now your consciousness has gone beyond that experience. Your consciousness has gone beyond that pattern. Your consciousness has gone beyond those circumstances. It's gone into a new state of being. And the growth period is your experience of catching up to that new state of being. It's that experience of embodying that growth that just occurred, that expansion that just occurred within you. And oftentimes that can look like physical symptoms. Like sometimes this can look like energy. Actually, it will. It will always look like energy detoxing from your body. Because first, this happens spiritually. First, we have an expansion spiritually. But then it starts to hit our physical layers, our physical body, our emotional body, our mental body. And this is where we start to feel that expansion that just occurred, that growth period. And this is where we're having a type of spiritual detox. On a physical level, this can be anything from feeling tired and exhausted and needing to lie down and rest more and sleep more and take breaks and go a lot slower. In fact, when you have a physical growth period, your body has a beautiful wisdom and intelligence to it that says, slow down. We need to catch up. Something just happened in a very accelerated way on a spiritual level, and we have to catch up to it. And I need you to take a time out for this. I need you to get out of the way so we can release this, because that's how I operate as a physical body. I need you to slow down. I need you to rest. I need you to take a break so that I can catch up to this. And so oftentimes people will get really tired in a growth period. They'll get sleepy. They'll need to sleep more, rest more. And this can be temporary. If you have a small growth period, this could be like an hour out of your day where suddenly you're like, whoa, I feel like I'm going to pass out or something. Blah. Or it could be something that occurs over hours, occurs over days, or sometimes over months or years, depending on the type of growth period you're in. Some people, especially the people that know how to manage their energy, they can go into some really deep growth periods, and they can go into some really long-term growth periods, and they can go into some really all-level growth periods because they know how to manage their energy, and they can go years into deep levels of purging. And oftentimes they are depleted during those years. It is like a hibernation. It is like a hermiting phase. It is like when you are in your house, you have very little energy to go outside of your house and socialize. You have very little energy to create and give to your outer world because you are going through a deep level of transformation, and you are giving all your energy to changing something deep inside of you, to catching up to that deep change inside of you. And so one of the first symptoms of a growth period could be physical depletion, being tired. Now, the other thing that can happen in a growth period is that you resist that. You could resist lying down and resting, possibly because we live in a society that doesn't validate that doesn't encourage that doesn't hold space for that or promote that in any way. We live in a society that pressures you to produce all the time, to get up and get things done all the time. And if we resist that for whatever reason, because of our social conditioning, because of our circumstances, then your body will also be very intelligent during that growth period and likely come down with some kind of illness, like a cold or a flu or a short-term ailment, or even an injury in which you have no choice but to rest, slow down, stop. And that's why a lot of people going through growth tend to sometimes have chronic illnesses, sometimes tend to get sick a lot, or even get injured quite a lot because they haven't quite been able to recognize that they need to slow down, that they need to rest, that they really need to sleep more, and they really need to allow themselves to catch up and integrate all the expansion that they're going through. And especially those people that struggle in relationships to make boundaries, that struggle in families to make boundaries, to carve out space for themselves, to say no. People that are in jobs um, surrounded by people that push and stress and put pressure. Sometimes the only excuse they have to slow down is to be sick. And that's one thing that society can somewhat validate. Oh, you're sick with the flu? You just stay home and we'll see you next week. Oh, you have a cold? Well, take a couple days off and we'll talk about this later. And so this is why some people, when they have a bigger growth period, they just get sick. And they're not really physically sick. Your body is just using illness as a way to stop you and slow you down and catch up, but also as a way to detox. When you get sick, sometimes you have a fever, sometimes you produce mucus, sometimes you get congested. And these are all ways that your body helps you detox, helps you kill off toxins in your body and detox. And so this is a very physical level kind of growth period that I'm talking about. Sometimes these growth periods are more emotional, where you are releasing repressed emotions, where you are releasing other people's emotions that you absorbed, that you took on, other people's pain, other people's anger, other people's sadness and grief. Maybe you're a strong healer. Maybe you're naturally very compassionate and empathic. Maybe you were really conditioned to process other people's emotions for them as a way to keep the harmony, keep the peace, survive in some way. Maybe you took on a lot that wasn't yours. Or maybe you were in environments where you couldn't express yourself, where it wasn't safe to feel your anger, where it wasn't safe to feel negative or sad or depressed or to grieve, and you possibly repressed something. So sometimes growth periods hit our emotional bodies. Sometimes our emotional body also goes through an expansion and we could purge emotions. And sometimes that could feel like out of control anger, like raginess, like very reactive anger that is kind of like chronic and hard to control. Sometimes that can be a sign that you're purging something and you can feel it coming out and it feels reactive and out of control because it's not yours, because it's not flowing, because it was stuck. And so the actual growth period can be very challenging on an emotional level because it feels a bit out of control. It feels more reactive. It feels strong as it comes out. And same thing can happen with like sadness or grief. Some people can have growth periods where they just start randomly crying for no reason. Or just something small happens that triggers a much deeper release and they just start crying and crying and crying. Some people that have a spiritual awakening, they start to have these major deconstruction energetic processes that start to occur. And it can be very destabilizing and they can literally be crying for months. There can be growth periods where people are crying for months or years because they are releasing so much energy. The other thing that can happen in a growth period is mentally. Mentally, we can be in a growth period where our mental bodies have to catch up to the expansion that we're going through. And oftentimes this can be like increased mental chatter. This could be like old psychological patterns becoming very loud within you, where you could be experiencing anything from the negative, self-deprecating, almost like foreign thoughts releasing from your mental body. Like let's say you absorbed, critical energy growing up. Maybe you had a very critical caregiver or family member or teacher, and you absorbed a very strong critical energy within you. When you have a growth period mentally and you are starting to shrink that inner critic and you are starting to let go of internalized self deprecation, it can feel very harsh mentally to go through that growth period because that critical energy becomes very loud inside of you as it's coming out. And it can be a bit destabilizing. You could kind of relive that experience of criticism or negativity as it comes out. There could be a particular story that you're experiencing as it's coming out. So definitely increased mind chatter can be a strong mental symptom. Overwhelm, anxiety, paranoia, fear. The mental body isn't necessarily good with unknown changes. And that's what's happening in a growth period. It's a change that's occurring beyond your mind's comprehension. And so oftentimes the mind, when you go into a growth period, will have its little tantrum. It'll have its little tantrum, and you can experience that as sometimes anxiety, sometimes overwhelm, sometimes fear, sometimes paranoia, sometimes just increased mind chatter. But that's a good sign that you're in a growth period because your mental body is picking up on change. Your mental body is like, I'm aware that change is occurring. I have no understanding of this change. It's beyond my comprehension. It's my job to help you survive. And so I'm going to compute this as bad. This could be bad. Something is changing and I don't know what it is. And that means, something bad is happening. And that's not true. Your growth periods are always serving you. Your growth periods are not something to be scared of. Your growth periods are always going to help you have a deeper rebalancing. This is a sign of deep healing. This is a sign of deep rebalancing. Growth periods are good. They're uncomfortable physically, emotionally, mentally, and energetically, spiritually, but they are deeply worth it. Now, when I have a growth period, I love to smile and laugh and be amused about it and be neutral about it. It's like, yes, thank you, because I am so sick of this energy. I'm so sick of this pattern. I'm so sick of living this way. I'm so sick of this experience of suffering or whatever it is that I'm dealing with. It's like, finally, I'm going beyond it. And so your growth periods will inherently expose what you're releasing, but also what you're coming into. Because let's say you are working through an inner child pattern. Let's say you have a pattern where no one ever listens to you, and you start to go into a growth period in your mental body and around your communication, around no one ever listening to you. Well, what happens is that you'll likely get triggered or activated on some level in your external life. It could be like really subtle, like someone takes a feather and just brushes up against that wound, or it could be really direct where you have an incident with someone that's just like someone jabbing their finger in your open wound and it really hurts. Nonetheless, it starts with you being triggered and activated. And then, you are aware that this is a story. You're aware it's a pattern, like it's a cage. It's like, why am I in this cage? I know it's a cage. I know this is not my truth. This cage is not real. It's just something I've taken on. This is bullshit. And your consciousness expands beyond the cage that you're stuck in. And that's when the growth period begins. And all of a sudden you start to feel sleepy. All of a sudden you start to feel your nervous system getting activated and getting triggered and anxious. And all of a sudden you start to feel anger, and all of a sudden you start to purge. And maybe there's like a few days that go by where you're feeling a little sick. Maybe you're lying in bed, you don't want to talk to anyone, and you feel really negative. And most people are stuck on that and say, I don't like growth periods. I don't like feeling uncomfortable. I don't like feeling negative. I don't like this. I don't like healing. I don't like growth. I don't like expansion. When is this going to stop? When are we going to stop having the growth periods? A lot of people get stuck on that. And it's valid. I understand. But if you're really looking at what's happening, it's freaking a miracle what's happening. You're evolving, you're transforming. And if you're letting that go, that means you've gone beyond it. So if you let go of that pain around not being heard and no one listening to you, then that means what you're stepping into is a new experience where people actually do listen to you, where people actually do value what you say. And that's the good news. And that's why a growth period is always serving you. A growth period is not a punishment. It is not life whipping you around and saying, this is how, broken you are. This is how messed up you are. You've got a lot of healing to do. This is going to suck. You have to go through all this, discomfort and uncomfortable, growth in order to be more balanced. I mean, sure, you could see it that way if you want to. I know on some levels it feels like that, but you're going to feel much more empowered if you allow a growth period, and if you surrender to it, and if you learn how to surf through those growth periods, and if you practice validating why that growth period is occurring or what's actually happening in that growth period. If you get to learn how to see the energy of your growth period, read your growth period, see what you're releasing and what you're expanding into. That's when growth periods become fun. That's when they become amusing. That's when you get some space within that growth period. That's when you get some energetic distance with the growth period that you're in. Suddenly, it's not such a big deal that you're messing everything up and that you're a mess and that your life's a mess and that you have this pattern that you're working through. Suddenly, it doesn't matter and it doesn't consume your whole day or your whole life that you're moving through this challenge. It's just a challenge. It's just a challenge. And what occurs is you start to see who you really are. Like, I am not this wounded little child that has nothing valuable to say. I am actually incredibly gifted with my voice. And a lot of people value what I have to say. I value what I have to say. And that's why that growth period began, likely because you began to value your own communication, your own words, what you have to say. You started to listen to it. So that's an example of a growth period, how it serves you. And what ends up happening is you detox that energy. You're no longer going to be attracting the same reality. You start to expand into a new reality, into a new identity, or into a new energetic resonance of sorts, a new type of energetic communication that attracts a totally different experience. And maybe you went from an experience of feeling isolated and alone and unheard to maybe going into an experience where there's opportunity, where you're welcomed, and where people want to listen. Right? So this is the beauty of a growth period. This is why when a growth period happens, you can relax and you can allow it. It's not something that you need to control. It's actually something that happens spontaneously, kind of like your internal blueprint system. It's the right time. Your wisdom has brought it on. Your clarity and your consciousness has brought it on. You have tapped into some type of truth that is beyond your current experience, and an expansion happens, and then you catch up to it. So these growth periods are always on your side. They're always on your side. They're always bringing you deeper levels of balance. They're always bringing you more deeper opportunities of integration. They're always bringing you more expanded states of consciousness. Growth periods are a good thing. And one of the most common questions I get about growth periods is, do they ever stop? Do they ever end? And I'll first say that you'll never get a growth period that you can't handle, because they are brought on by your wisdom. And so oftentimes, if you don't have the right tools, if you don't have the right support, if you don't have the right circumstances, then your growth periods are going to be smaller. they're going to be shorter, and you're going to have a lot of space between those growth periods. And some people might be like, oh, yeah, I like that. Well, you like that because it's maybe easier in your life. There's less activation, there's less triggers, there's less challenge, but you're still in your cage. You're still operating in that old energetic system that feels like a cage. And at some point, you're going to run up against those bars. You're going to have a dream that's bigger outside of that cage, and you're going to keep hitting the wall of the cage, and you're going to get pissed at it. You're like, I don't like this cage. Why does it keep happening? I have this dream that's outside of this cage. Why can't I get there? Why can't I have it? Why can't I have what I want? And that's when you start to hit those growth periods again. And then you have those growth periods and you go into resistance and you're like, oh, I don't want these growth periods. I don't like to grow. It's so uncomfortable. And then you put on the brakes again. You resist it. You slow it down. And, and that's when maybe you start to recognize like, okay, maybe I need to learn some tools. Maybe I need to learn how to, heal myself. Maybe I need to learn how to develop my intuition. Maybe I need to learn something that helps me navigate this, something that helps me embody this. Maybe, you start to gather more practical, embodied, grounded modalities and tools and practices that can help you regulate, that can help you manage the energy, that can help you start to lean in to those growth periods, start to surf the waves of those growth periods, start to swim in the waters of those growth periods. You can think about these growth periods almost like the ocean. And when you have a growth period, it's kind of like a wave that comes. It's like a wave of enlightenment. It's like a wave comes. And sometimes that growth period is small. It's just a small wave and you're like, woo. I had a couple hours today where like I felt a little dizzy. I felt a little tired. Like I released an energy, but now I'm fine again. It was just a small little wave. And then sometimes you have those waves that are like, oh boy, that's a huge wave, and it like kind of knocks you sideways, right? And it comes through and it washes something out of your life. Like suddenly a big change happens in your life. Like, something changes in your career, in your health, in your relationship, like something, major changes. And so, yeah, these growth periods can kind of be like the ocean. And like when a growth period occurs, I like to think of it as a wave because, are you going to resist a wave? Can you actually stop a wave in the ocean, especially a tsunami? Like, can you stand in front of it and be like, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to opt out. I'm not going to subscribe to this growth period. And we like to think on a human level that we can control it or we can kind of stop it. But at some point, your soul has a wisdom that's like, if you want this dream, if you want to get out of this, prison, this energetic prison, this old system that you're in, you actually have to, allow this wave to occur, allow this growth period to occur. And so you can't just stand in front of a wave and be like, stop it. You can't just stand in front of a wave and like put your hand out and block the wave or try to push the wave away. Like you'll get slammed if that happens. You get slammed, you get tossed around. And so there's a couple things you can do when a wave comes, when you're in the ocean. You can either dive into it, and you can go deep and you can go, just dive deep under the wave and let it pass. That might be you being like, whoa, I have a growth period coming on and I'm going to cancel my meeting that I had this afternoon and I'm just going to lie down and rest, or I'm going to carve out some time and some space this weekend and I'm really going to give myself a healing or do some energy work on myself, or I'm going to really do one of my favorite practices to help me connect and, rebalance or do whatever I need to do to bring more clarity to this, to respond to this, to process this, to integrate this, to do some kind of work that helps me embody this growth in some way. And that's what it's like to kind of go deep. You're leaning in to the growth period on a deeper level, and you're letting it pass. And then there's those people that know how to surf a wave. They see the growth period coming. They know what the growth period is about. They have tools. They have a surfboard, and they get on that surfboard and they're like, woo! They start riding that wave. And that can be like one of those growth periods where change is happening. Change is happening, and you can't stop that change. And so you have to go with that change. And that would be like if suddenly a big wave comes and you lose a job. Let's say you suddenly lose a job, like the company dissolved or something, and you lost your job, and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I lost my job. I have no paycheck. And that's like a big wave coming, right? And so you can grab your surfboard, which is like, okay, I'm going to regulate myself first. I'm freaking out and I need to regulate my nervous system. I need to cry. I need to, shake out all this fear. I need to, journal about this. I need to go for a walk. I need to, regulate myself. And then, okay, then I'm going to like confront all the fear inside of me, all the stories that I have about, being on the streets and being homeless and having to sell my car and eat out the trash can and whatever it is. You start to clear that energy, like freaking out that you're going to be impoverished all of a sudden. And then you start surfing that wave. And you're like, all right, what's my next step? I'm going to call all my friends and tell them I'm looking for a new job and just ask if anyone has any opportunities. Okay, what's my next step? I'm going to update my resume. Okay, what's my next step? I'm going to put my resume, over here and over there and over there. I'm going to upload it here, and I'm just going to, you keep getting those natural next steps when you're surfing that wave. Like, what's my next step? I did this. What's my next step? I did that. What's my next step? I'm going to do this now. And that's you surfing the wave. You're saying, what's my next step? What's my next step? What's my next step? What's my next step? And you just keep going with that wave. And that wave actually takes you somewhere. That growth period has an intelligence to it that's like, this is the way, this is the way, this way, over here, over here, over here. And you're surfing that wave and it's taking you there. And by the time you're done surfing that wave, you are in a completely different place. You're in a completely different set of circumstances. You have allowed change to occur externally in your life. And that's what it's like to surf a wave. You are basically surfing through change, except you're going through change gracefully. When you watch a surfer, you don't see them being tumbled around by the wave. I mean, that can definitely happen. But when you see someone actually surfing a wave, they are balanced on their surfboard. They are graceful. Okay. And they are leaning in. They are, consciously balancing, consciously leaning in. They are consciously focused. They are keeping their eye on the direction that they're going in, not behind them, not what's around them. They are looking at where they're going, right? And they are leaning into that wave, and they just have to trust the experience until that wave finally dissolves. So same with spiritual growth. When that growth period comes on, you got to trust, you got to allow, you got to surrender, you got to stay focused on the direction that you're going in. You got to maintain your balance, most importantly, if you want to surf a wave. And you want to keep taking those steps. Keep taking those steps until that wave has dissolved. And that's how you surf a wave. That is like surfing through change in your life, whether it's small change or big change, those bigger waves that come through. The reason why I'm talking about growth periods today is because we are in a season that tends to bring on bigger growth periods on a societal level, on a personal level, and there's many reasons why this occurs around this time. One reason is that we're in a natural time of release and slowing down and inner reflection. That's the natural energy of wintertime. And if you're in the northern hemisphere, you're in a natural seasonal cycle of wintertime on planet Earth. And if you listen to the wisdom of nature, if you listen to the wisdom of your body, this is a time when nature has shed its leaves, the trees are becoming dormant, it starts to snow, everything slows down, you're stuck inside your house. This is a natural time when your body slows down, when you have that feeling to hibernate and go within. And there's something about reflection, going within, that stimulates growth. And it's because you're bringing awareness to your inner world, to your inner energy dynamics, to you actually reflect more and you start to, thin the veils between your external world and your internal world and your energetic realms, your spiritual realms, your intuition. Your intuition becomes more heightened when you rest. Your intuition becomes more heightened when you go within. And that intuition can give you an insight. It can bring you clarity. It can help you have an expansion in some way. You can, just by going within, you can have an expansion. And that's why most people that have growth periods are reflective. They are self-aware and they regularly have a practice of going within. And that's what creates those expansions, because your consciousness just keeps expanding. When you bring insight to something, when you bring awareness to something, it just keeps expanding. Right? And so wintertime is just a natural time of growth simply because we're going slower, we're resting more, our intuition is heightened, and there's an inward reflection that begins to occur. And winter naturally brings on a release, a detoxing process, like a natural death, decomposing process. It is the end of a cycle and is preparing us to renew and align with a new creative cycle, which starts in the springtime. And so that's a natural time of growth for anyone that goes through like a seasonal cycle of winter. But also another, I think, interesting reason why there's a lot of growth at this time of year, even if you're not in a winter time. Let's say you live in the southern hemisphere and you're in the summertime. This is a time of holidays. And oftentimes during the time of holidays, we are revisiting family and friends and relationships from our past. And especially when you visit people from your past, especially people that were highly involved in the way that you were raised, like your family, this is like interacting with people that can trigger very deep things inside of you, very deep patterns inside of you. So there's that funny quote out there that says, if you think you're enlightened, go visit your family. And it's always humbling to go see your family, no matter how conscious you are, no matter how enlightened you are. When you go visit your family, you're likely going to be working through very, very deep growth periods. And I just want to throw this out there. Just because you get triggered, just because you get activated, just because you activate an old wound or an old pattern inside of you, that does not mean that you're not an enlightened being. Okay? Enlightenment has nothing to do with perfection and you on a human level being perfect. You will always hold the memories and the energetic memory of all of your experience, which includes your wounds. And that is wisdom. That is the way you gain wisdom and the way you spiritually mature, is through all of that experience, even the shitty experiences, right? So there's nothing wrong with having deeper things that you're working through. It doesn't mean that you're not a conscious being. It doesn't mean that you're not an enlightened being. It doesn't mean that you're regressing or that you're broken. It really just means that you're aware, actually. You're aware of yourself. You're aware of your inner cages. You're aware of your restrictions. You're aware of your patterns. And really the difference between an enlightened being and someone who is not enlightened is that someone that's not enlightened is going to react and kind of go back into their default patterns and kind of be a victim to their patterns and choose not to expand and grow outside of their patterns. Whereas an enlightened being is going to become aware of those patterns, going to validate how shitty those patterns are and how much it's restricted you. But an enlightened being is going to embrace expansion and growth and healing. An enlightened being will have a growth period, right? And that's what's the difference between, someone that's maybe not a conscious enlightened being versus someone that is that enlightened beings will have growth periods. Okay, so if you're having a growth period, congratulations, you're enlightened. So meeting with family, meeting with people from your past can be something that's deeply activating for you. It puts you into deeper growth periods. And so I just wanted to throw that out there. Be prepared, as we go into winter to have deeper growth periods. It's a time for you to be more compassionate towards yourself, more forgiving towards yourself, to embrace your growth periods, to either dive deep into the waters or surf the waves if you need to. I think the last thing that I'll mention that I didn't finish completing was that age-old question of, are these growth periods ever going to stop? Are they ever going to end? And, I already started by saying, well, it really depends on your wisdom, and you'll never get a growth period that you can't handle. And the growth period that you have is based on the level of wisdom you have and the capacity for the growth period, the actual capacity you have for the growth period. So the more ability and capacity you have to manage your energy, the bigger growth periods you're going to have. And so at first, when you start to gain more tools, for example, to manage your energy, or you start to pick up more modalities or spiritual practices that help you balance yourself, that help you allow, that help you have clarity and self-connection, like the more of those tools that you have, the more capacity that you have for change and for growth and for healing, there is a funny thing that starts to happen, and you start to have more growth periods, and you start to have bigger growth periods, and you start to have deeper growth periods. And at first it feels like, yes, I'm moving through energy. I'm experiencing more freedom. I'm, changing my life. I'm feeling more empowered. Like things are coming together. And then at some point, it can be normal to just always be in a growth period, like a constant growth period. It doesn't go away. You're just constantly expanding and you're constantly allowing it. And it's just a constant state. It's just growth, expansion. You're just constantly in that state of expansion. And that can occur. Right. And then we can have these milestones, these permanent shifts, right? And we can have a permanent shift in consciousness, a permanent change within us, a permanent state that's of deeper balance. And, in those cases, you won't have the same growth periods that you had. It's like your growth periods evolve, they change with you. Like let's say you release a pattern. Well, you're not going to have growth periods around that pattern anymore. You're going to have growth periods related to a different pattern or something else, that you're embodying in your life. But here's the thing. Consciousness is always expanding. And as long as you're in the human form, which is physical and limited, you will likely have to keep catching up to that. And so as long as your consciousness is expanding, which it always will be, you on a human level will always have growth periods. However, I do think that there are marked phases, marked processes, marked milestones that can bring relief. I think there are so many things involved, like your soul blueprint, like your personal path, your unique path. Maybe you're a really big soul that came in here to have a big impact on society. And maybe, you have to build a business, or maybe you have to build an empire. Maybe you have to, you know, you know, learn a lot of skills or develop something, or, you know, master something, become an expert, and so that you can deliver and like embody this purpose that you came in with, and in that case, your growth periods might have a certain flavor to them, might have a certain tone to them, might have a certain intensity to them, might have a certain acceleration to them, simply because you came in to do some big stuff. You came in to have a big impact. You came in to impact a lot of people. You came in to, move some energy, not just in your personal evolution, but in society, on Earth, right now, through lots of change. All right, maybe you're one of those people, and in that case, honey, you're gonna have some big growth periods. But if you came to, let's say, have a unique path where you are closing out, lifetimes, where you had major impacts on society, and you're really just here to have a peaceful life. You're really just here to enjoy your life. You're really just here to slow down and experience peace and calm. Then, there's not a huge focus on embodying things, showing up in your relationships in a certain way. And, again, that's going to be a different flavor of growth periods for you, a different kind of tone to your growth periods, a different kind of purpose for your growth periods. So it really depends on your unique path, the milestones that are on your path, the certain things that you're doing on your path, and what that requires of you to embody. That's going to be linked to your growth periods. The bigger, the more impactful, the more that you're creating, the more growth periods that you're going to have. The biggest creators on Earth have to have change. They have to allow change. They have to surf, the expansions that occur in their lives on some level. And so some of the biggest creators have the biggest growth periods. So I do think that we do shift into permanent states. I do think we have these milestones, and then again, we're constantly expanding. And really, the rhythm of your life is really unique to you. And so you may go through certain phases in your life that are where you have accelerated growth, and phases where you are slowing that growth down and doing more embodiment, doing more integration, doing more settling in and grounding into like a new version of you. And so I think that's not really a black and white answer I can give to people, but I can share the wisdom of that and my observations around that. And really that's especially in this lifetime, that's not really why we're here. We're here to experience a massive transformation within us and on this planet. And so we're really not here to be spiritually lazy. We're here to have a epic, profound transformation. And it all starts on a personal level. But when we all do it together, we see massive change that occurs collectively. All right, guys, that's my little transmission, I guess, about growth periods. Your little holiday refresher and reminder of what it means to have a growth period, and how precious and special and miraculous it is, and how much your growth period is serving you and supporting you, no matter how uncomfortable it may feel in the moment, and to trust it, to allow it, to surrender to it, to either go deep or grab a surfboard and start surfing those waves. All right. Thank you for being with me. I am so grateful for all of you listening, and I so love to hear back from you. If you are listening to this on YouTube, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so that you can receive notifications when I upload new episodes. And if you're listening to this on Spotify, please give this podcast a rating. I love to see comments from you. It is like giving me a huge psychic hug when you comment on the videos, when you like the videos, when you share them, when you give them ratings. Very, very much like a love language for me right now as I'm starting to, try to find ways to connect with you beyond all the things that I do in Realization Hub. And just to throw it out there, I do have it like on the horizon, an intention to, get this podcast on a hosting platform so I can just kind of upload it to a lot of different apps. So depending on what app you prefer to use, you can, find it on those apps. It's not available yet, but that is on the horizon. That is my intention. And if you need support during this holiday season, maybe you go through some deep growth. One of my favorite things to do when I'm going through deep growth is to reach out to someone that can support me. And that's what I'm here to do for you, whether it's doing an astrology reading, whether it's giving you an energy healing and helping you get some relief, where it's more of an intuitive reading where you're getting some clarity and some insight. Or maybe you want to learn some tools. Maybe you want to take some classes. Maybe you want to really sit down and have someone work with you one-on-one, teaching you how to manage your energy, develop your psychic abilities, or integrate something that you're going through in your life. I'm your psychic bestie over here, transformation, someone that has surfed the waves of transformation in a very accelerated way. And it is my deep honor and joy and passion to be a part of your experience. Okay. Love you guys. Bye. I'll see you on the next one.